for all my students out there, I teach counseling students, can you describe the difference between regular psychology and Buddhist psychology, contemplative psychology? Can you just describe the differences?
Sure, and I think that there's a lot of progressive schools of counseling that probably fill in a lot of the gaps, but contemplative psychology uses meditation as the main lab. That's the research lab, is looking at your own mind, looking at your own experience, and learning from the experience of contemplative traditions. So there are some differences. For instance, the evolution of my ideas about green light and red light, that's very much a contemplative tradition. In Western psychology, we look at emotions a little bit more as, you could say anger. You could say, well, sometimes anger is productive and sometimes it's destructive. What I can say is the green light anger has this effect and the red light anger has that effect. And it's based on one is me first and one is we first. So you can make a little bit different distinctions when you're working with contemplative psychology. When I was in graduate school, the approach that we took was to every single case study we did was first person. So we never based our study of, psychopathology on third person report. It was always somebody describing what it was like for their mind to go through these changes. Whether we were studying bipolar situations or addictions or schizophrenia or any of these labels, we actually studied, Thomas de Quincey or different, a writer who described his or her own journey through that state of mind. In the 3-month retreat that I mentioned, what we did was we used different exercises to intensify our own states of mind so that we would experience within ourselves some of the different extreme states of mind that our clients would report. And so it's very much trying as much as possible to never have a barrier between yourself and the patient or the client, that from what you learn from your own mind is what you have to offer rather than being theoretical.
Yeah, if you walk the journey, to the degree that you walk the journey, you know the path that somebody else also walks.
Yes.
And that realization that we really are one.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm actually finding the academic world in general really being challenged by even the principles of the quantum sciences, where, they're really talking about the fact that there is no true objectivity in some sense, that as soon as you look at something, you're changed by that, as well as whatever you're looking at is changed. So I'm saying even with regard to research, like even in my research, working with organic design, where in my research I had to look at my own inner journey as well as looking at what was happening around at the same time, recognizing that interconnection.
Yes. I think that from my work, it's probably the parallel is the use of words or the use of communication, that every single word that a person expresses changes the world in some way. It doesn't go away. It affects. We create molecules or we influence each other constantly, and there's no distinction between a friend or an enemy or a stranger. We affect people. You walk down the street and someone smiles at you, it affects you. I see that, I see us as this interdependent whole that's constantly where the energy is flowing. And even if you look at a boundary, it's porous. This notion of a barrier, this belief that you're cut off is a real aberration. It's a complete misunderstanding. And unfortunately, It's a misunderstanding that whole societies have been created out of.
Which is causing a lot of the difficulties that we're having today.
Which is why we have to be passionate about paradigm shift. We have to. And,
yes.
I believe that, I'm sure you and I share some very fundamental agreements, and one of them is that human beings are fundamentally sane and awake and good, and all we need to do is awaken that and give access to it and sort of clear up the misunderstanding in some ways.
Yes. And that's a worldview that very often people will look at me and say, well, you're just so naive. Just take a look at the newspapers. And it takes a lot to maintain that conviction and continue the work and know that just in continuing the work that you are helping to lift and shift the world.
And also, it is, I think I'm sure this is true for you too. You gain certainty or confidence when you've actually seen it in yourself. When you know it for sure, when you've actually, that's to me the advantage of having been both in the deepest of shadows as well as in these terrific spiritual retreats, is you actually have seen it in yourself. You know that the goodness is there and that you're absolutely no different than anyone else. Not even just a matter of a belief system, it's a matter of knowing what is.
Yeah, the difference between knowing and believing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a profound difference, and good point.
As a therapist or a counselor, that's what people pick up on, because when you know for sure that that's fundamentally sane and that they're just kind of confused, it's a whole different message than if you're afraid of what's going to happen, if you're afraid of their mind.
Yes, and that's actually, even for me as a therapist, when people come in, some of my thought would be very akin to what you're talking about, which is that therapy in and of itself, the container of therapy, is like a green zone. And, where if you have that knowing yourself, you can be like a foundation for people to have a transformative experience, because they can just kind of, one of my old mentors used to say, you kind of lend them, she called it, you lend them your ego. She uses ego in a very different sense than sometimes if you lend them your strength for that moment in that transformative counseling space where feeling that, they can then move through their changes in a safe way.
Exactly. And I had forgotten to mention that was actually what my original idea was, that the green zone is what I experienced as a therapist, and that space. And how could I offer that to people in a more kind of socially expansive way, that that if people didn't have the money or the opportunity, that it was a little bit of a connecting point between being a therapist and actually seeing what the culture of the Maritimes was like, where there's this old-fashioned kind of community where people offer that kind of friendliness to each other, and realize that in an urban society we lose that. So those two influences were behind this idea of green zone.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking today to somebody who came in, and basically just disconnected because nobody makes time to just spend time with each other anymore. And I was talking about how very often now the therapist's office and that green zone is replacing what used to be the community and what used to be the extended family system. So, it's like the person that you can talk to and share and learn about yourself through doing that. Other people are just too busy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I found too. There's a certain percentage of the clients that I worked with who were actually really interested in spiritual transformation. Sometimes wonder, which hat should I be wearing, And often I would say to someone, well, it's not therapy you're looking for, it's spiritual counseling,
And of course they're so closely connected, because again, we can't separate out our emotional, physical, spiritual beings just the same way. They're all interdependent on a micro level, as well as, we're interdependent on sort of the more macro level. And so, when you're working on an emotional thing, there's impact on the spiritual. And when the spiritual is worked with, there's impact on the emotional and the physical. And so they're so closely connected sometimes.
Yes, that's right. Thinking of, for instance, when people can't afford therapy, what other alternatives would they have? People go to church or go to a, 12-step program or something. So, no, I can't really, I can't envision all the different ways, but I thought at least getting the concept of green zone out there, and once that model is out there, then we'll see how people use it.
Well, Susan, I just think that the work that you're doing for individuals and for the world in general, just a wonderful wonderful, lovely, positive contribution, and I think just perfectly timely for what the world needs right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really thank you for moving through the world just with the kind of being that you are, and sharing your wisdom through your writings and through your workshops, and sharing with us today by, helping us do this podcast and put the information into the world. And so I want to thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed today.
Oh, thanks, Juanita. I really appreciate your interest and support and encouragement. You're the perfect example of encouraging Green Zone partner. So.
I always kind of am that earth part.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were describing the earth, I was just smiling to myself here. Yeah, okay. I can relate to that. Susan, I wish you the best.
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to meeting you.
Yes, and I look forward to seeing your book. Do let us know when your book is coming out, and we'll help you in every way that we can to get your message out as far and as wide, and to all of those people that you're a prayer to what they're asking for, and they're a prayer to us and in helping shift the paradigm.
Thank you. Let's keep working on it together here.
Yeah. And so for everybody out there who wants to learn more about Susan and her work and all of the ideas that she was talking about, once again, go to her website. That's probably the easiest way to connect with her, which is www.greenzonetalk.com. Thank you very much for tuning in. And once again, thanks, Susan, and enjoy the information.
Thank you.